You know, no matter which version of Supergirl you look at times she can feel like she's stuck in Superman's shadow. Where Superman is iconic and mythic, Supergirl sounds like a tribute act. And yet, the writers of the DC animated universe uncovered a tremendous idea. That Kara's story really takes flight once she stops trying to be Superman and she becomes something he never could. Now, to really illustrate what made their version so good, we first have to talk about the comic book source material and the surprisingly complicated history for such a simple concept. The idea of Supergirl first appeared in Superman number 123, published in 1958. This was a story where Jimmy Olsen was granted 3 wishes by an ancient artifact. His first wish was for Superman to have a superpowered companion that he could relate to. The resulting Supergirl was essentially a female counterpart to Superman, and she ended up sacrificing herself heroically to save him from kryptonite. The idea proved so popular that DC introduced a permanent version 1 year later in Action Comics number 252. Now, I've got an original copy here in my hands, and it's very tatty, as you can see. I'm actually afraid to open it and take a look. Thank goodness for digital copies, eh? But this Supergirl wasn't fantasy or some wish brought to life. She was Kara Zor-El, Superman's cousin, and the character most readers now recognise as Supergirl. Kara's origin reflected DC's, at the time, focus on elaborate science fiction stories. Rather than escaping Krypton alongside her cousin, Kara survived within Argo City, a fragment of Krypton that had broken away intact following the planet's destruction. Her father, Zor-El, and mother, Allura, managed to preserve life there for years, but the remnants of the planet slowly transformed into kryptonite, making survival impossible in the long term. When disaster finally struck and their defenses fell, Kara was sent to Earth in a rocket so she could find safety with her older cousin Kal-El. However, Clark Kent couldn't justify bringing a teenage girl into his life. He was a bachelor after all, and so he left her at the Midvale orphanage. The key thing to remember about these comics is that at the time Superman was on his own. The Kents were long dead. Kara initially lived secretly in Midvale while balancing school life and superheroics, often operating in Superman's shadow while gradually establishing her own supporting cast and identity. Over time, she became one of DC's most recognisable heroines and an important member of the wider Superman family. But that changed dramatically during Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985. DC decided to streamline its continuity and re-establish Superman as the sole surviving Kryptonian. As part of that editorial overhaul, Supergirl was killed battling the Anti-Monitor in one of the event's defining moments, sacrificing herself to save Superman and the multiverse itself. The cover of that issue featuring her death has become a classic that gets referenced time and time again, so keep that in mind for later on. Following the reboot, Kara Zor-El was erased from continuity entirely. But the thing is, Supergirl was too valuable a concept to abandon completely. Since Superman was no longer allowed to have a Kryptonian cousin, writers created entirely new versions of the character to fill the gap, and they really jumped through some hoops to do this. The first major replacement was Matrix, a shape-shifting protoplasmic being from another dimension who adopted a female form inspired by Superman and became Supergirl. In the 1990s, Matrix merged with a troubled young woman named Linda Danvers after saving her life during a demonic ritual. This created a new Supergirl who blended Matrix's powers with Linda's human identity, pitting her in a battle involving angels and demons on Earth. And that's where things were at when Superman the Animated Series went into production. As they often did, the DCAU writers opted to streamline things. There are no parallel dimensions or angels battling demons, and they weren't allowed to make Kara his biological cousin. Okay, so she wasn't allowed to be from Krypton. Fine. She was from Argo, a sister planet to Krypton that was thrown into chaos after Krypton's destruction. Her name was Kara Inzi, and technically she wasn't related to Superman at all, but he still called her his cousin. Yes, this was done to satisfy DC's mandate, but at the same time it demonstrates Superman's character. Kara was the last survivor of Argo. She and her family had gone into suspended animation, but she was the only one to make it. She had lost everyone. Rather than abandoning her or putting her in an orphanage, Superman welcomed her into his family and she was raised by the Kents on the farm in Smallville. In my opinion, the thing that makes the DC Animated Universe version of Supergirl stand out is that she lives beneath the shadow of a symbol she technically had no right to inherit. She proudly wears the crest of the House of El, don't get me wrong, and she gladly fights beside Superman. She embodies his values and undeniably belongs with him. But there's a big difference between the two. Superman was raised on Earth and he has no memory of Krypton. Everything he knows about the place comes from one of Brainiac's recordings. Kara grew up on Argo. She remembers their society before it fell. Her grief is much more intimate. Where Clark Kent grew up ignorant of his background, she is acutely aware that she is an outsider, no matter how much the Kents embrace her. This is why Earth never fully feels like home to her in the way that it does for Clark Kent. That's part of why Kara initially comes across as a little abrasive. She's impulsive, defensive, and resistant to authority, especially Superman's. Clark tries to guide her towards a stable human life with the Kents in Smallville, hoping that she embraces it in a way that he never could. And maybe that's telling. Perhaps that's what Superman wants for himself, but his morals prevent him from doing that. So it's kind of strange that he wouldn't understand that Kara would feel similarly to him. From her perspective, being hidden away on a farm must have felt suffocating. Argonian civilization was centuries ahead of Earth technology and culture. It would have been akin to one of us being transported back into the Dark Ages. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't know how to milk a cow, so I know I would struggle. And at times there seems to be some resentment towards Superman. She desperately wants to be her true self, not hiding away in the countryside, but Superman doesn't want her to get hurt. He knows that there are powerful people out there who would hurt her to get at him, and he can't stand the idea of losing his last connection to his culture. And to be fair, Superman was right. See how Lex Luthor incapacitated her with a kryptonite missile in the STAS episode Legacy. That aside, the key difference between the two is how they approach other people. Superman often carries the burden of responsibility alone because he's terrified that anyone fighting beside him could get hurt. So he tries to protect them by keeping them at arm's length, for the most part. Kara, meanwhile, craves connection. From the moment she arrives on Earth, she instinctively reaches towards others instead of away from them. In her debut story, Little Girl Lost, she forms a partnership with Jimmy Olsen, of all people, someone that Superman has traditionally shielded, and she treats him like an equal who can help her navigate this strange new world. And nowhere is this more obvious than in the new Batman Adventures episode, Girls' Night Out, where Kara meets Batgirl and bonds with her almost instantly. The contrast with the famously cautious relationship between Superman and Batman is actually pretty funny. Where Batman and Superman spent years circling each other with suspicion and philosophical disagreement, Barbara and Kara become friends over one chaotic night of fighting Livewire, Harley Quinn, and Poison Ivy. The episode even pauses for them to hang out, compare lives, and eat ice cream together afterwards. That warmth is essential to Kara's identity. She expands on Superman's humanity by allowing herself to lean on others emotionally in ways he often struggles to. I'd argue that her role in Superman the Animated Series was fairly small, mostly because she debuted towards the series' end. But I think she came into her own in Justice League Unlimited as part of the Cadmus arc. She was famously cloned by the scientists at Project Cadmus, headed by former ally Professor Emil Hamilton, creating Galatea. She was essentially everything that the government feared Superman and his Justice League to be. A brutal weapon with impossible powers and completely without remorse. In utilitarian terms, she is arguably the better fighter because she's been aged up, is more powerful, and is mostly without mercy. However, there is a psychic connection between the two of them. In her dreams, Kara sees Galatea's actions and fears that she's losing her mind. Galatea, meanwhile, is troubled by Kara's emotions, specifically her feelings of guilt, and wants her dead so that she can resume her important work without pesky feelings getting in the way. But ultimately, Kara wins out because of her humanity. Yes, Galatea is stronger than her, but Kara has friends. Where Galatea surrounds herself with mindless clones of the Ultimen, Kara stands with the Justice League, in particular Steel, and together they can overcome practically anything. That becomes the recurring theme of her story arc. She may resent authority a little, but ultimately she succeeds because she trusts other people, even if they're not as powerful as her. Especially figures like Green Arrow, who she works with to disable a Chinese superweapon that has gone rogue, or the Question, who uncovers the truth about Galatea. In Chaos at the Earth's core, Supergirl embraces her connection to Superman by donning a new costume that matches his. Where the white shirt, denim skirt and red boots represented her youthful attempt at self-identification, eventually she fully embraces her connection to Superman. Likewise, she also exhibits more of Superman's traits, like when she chooses not to hear Stargirl's complaints about her popularity. The Supergirl of Superman the Animated Series may very well have said something cutting to Stargirl, but a more mature Kara chooses instead to sit there and pretend that she doesn't have super hearing. I think she can understand Stargirl's feelings of jealousy and doesn't want to make things worse by confronting her. In that same episode, she wins over Stargirl eventually with her humility. When the group are trapped beneath a red sun, Supergirl's powers begin to fade. She continues fighting without complaint, but does need support from the others. However, when she takes on Metallo while weakened, she improvises with whatever weapons she can find and ultimately defeats him through sheer determination. But it's Stargirl that saves her from Metallo's kryptonite, helping the two bond. The purpose of this episode was to establish that Kara doesn't need powers to be a hero, and shows that Superman's symbol is not defined by powers. Kara earns the symbol precisely when she no longer has access to the abilities associated with it, and really, it's Kara's association with the Justice League and her own competence that helps to change her relationship with Superman too. In her earliest appearances, Clark treats Kara with paternal protectiveness. He's worried she's reckless, immature, and unprepared. But by the end of Justice League Unlimited, Green Lantern acknowledges that there is little left to teach her. Kara is no longer just being labelled as Superman's cousin, she's judged as a hero among heroes. And that brings her story to its perfect conclusion in the Justice League Unlimited episode, Far From Home. When Kara, Green Arrow and Green Lantern are taken to the 31st century alongside the Legion of Superheroes, she finally encounters a world that resembles the civilization she lost. For perhaps the first time since arriving on Earth, she is somewhere that feels emotionally familiar. But most importantly, she is somewhere Superman is not, and she can be herself, which includes getting into a relationship with a Brainiac. Oh dear. Now, they had been summoned to help free the Legion of Superheroes from the control of the Fatal Five, but Brainiac 5 ominously notes that the history books state that only 2 of the trio returned to their time period. When Supergirl learns this, and that she is not expected to survive the battle with the Fatal Five, she doesn't care. She fights on anyway. And we end up with Supergirl appearing to sacrifice her life to free the Legion and Green Lantern, including this wonderful shot inspired by that Crisis on Infinite Earths cover I mentioned earlier. But don't worry, she's fine. They all are. The reason only 2 of them returned is because she has decided to stay in the 31st century and build a life for herself there. The lost little girl who arrived on Earth angry, displaced and uncertain finally discovers a place where she can simply be Kara. And in doing so, she proves herself worthy of Superman's legacy in a way that blood alone never could. She may not have been Kryptonian, but Kara earned the right to wear Superman's symbol and carry it forward into the future. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please use the like button, leave a comment, share the video, tell all your friends about me. And do not forget to subscribe, because looking at my analytics I can see that 70% of people that watch my videos aren't subscribed. And it would be a big help if you could help me get over 100,000 subscribers. And if you really enjoyed my videos, then you might want to pick up my book, Rogues Gallery, available now on Amazon. It has a beautiful cover by Batman the Animated Series background painter John Calmette, a foreword written by the director Dan Reber, and there's even a section in there from the late Kevin Conroy where he shared some words around love, loss, and the immortal soul. This was shared with me after my grandfather passed away, and I was quite upset. So it meant a lot to hear Batman giving us some comfort, and those words hit differently now that he's gone as well. Special thanks to all of my channel members. You've seen their names going up and down here on the right, possibly the left, depending on how this video turns out. Channel memberships cost $1.99 a month, and you get early access to all of my video essays, and sometimes you get a special little vote where you get to decide what I talk about. Huge thanks to these people, because they help to make these videos possible. And while I have your attention, please consider checking out my other channel, Serum Lake Comics, where I mostly talk about DC's Absolute Comics, but I do like to talk about other things from time to time. Next time. When I return on Monday, I want to discuss a controversial episode of Justice League Unlimited that changed the underlying message of Batman Beyond forever. Yes, it's time to discuss Epilogue. And next Friday, I continue my march towards the end of my coverage of Beware the Batman by talking about their version of Lieutenant James Gordon and how he learned to stop worrying and cooperate with Batman. Hope to see you then.